I want to give you one example of how rhetoric, multiple framing, and politicization work together. Um, so let's apply critical thinking to a concrete example. Last year, Time magazine decided to make Elon Musk the person of the year. Whatever the reason, I'm not interested in that right now. And they made an article and they explained, well, they present Elon Musk and the presentation of Elon Musk is supposed to explain to us why it was chosen. And I want to look at some aspects of the portrait of Elon Musk to explain this idea of acknowledging politicization, lifting the veil of rhetoric, and multiple framing. So if you look at the portrait, and I'm just going to read quickly the extract here. So the subtext was how a quiet, bookish child from Pretoria, South Africa, became the richest man on earth. Described as a shy South African with Asperger's syndrome who escaped a brutal childhood and overcame personal tragedy, Musk was born to a wealthy family in 1971. Born in Pretoria in 1971, Elon was prone to long silences and speed reading the encyclopedia. When he was 12, he wrote the code for a video game called Blaster. Errol Musk was a brilliant engineer and entrepreneur. He was also, in Elon's telling, an evil man. Musk's maternal grandfather had moved from Canada to South Africa in 1950, arriving during the early years of apartheid. When Musk was 17, he made the opposite journey, in part to avoid the regime's military draft. School was nearly as bad as home for the precocious child. Vicious gangs of bullies targeted Musk relentlessly. He was raised in a tough environment and born with a very special brain, says Antonio Gracias. 99.1% of people in that situation don't come out of it. Some small percentage come out of it. So if you read the portrait, there's nothing factually wrong with what they're saying. I'm not in a position of authority and I'm not the biographer of Musk, but there's nothing that's factually wrong. But interestingly, there's in the entire portrait not one mention of the fact that growing up during apartheid, Elon Musk was white, and maybe being a white man growing up during apartheid in South Africa had an impact. We are being told about his grandfather, who was a terrible man. That's absolutely true. We are being told that he grew up in a wealthy family. That's absolutely true. But we are presented in a context where what is emphasized is that he overcame some difficulties. We are told right away that he suffers from Asperger's syndrome. So we choose, or they choose in their presentation to emphasize some things and not others to explain his trajectory. If we go further into the articles, for example, at some point they say Musk still must answer to earthly authorities. That's one of the rare, slightly critical passage of the article. His companies have faced all allegations of sexual harassment and poor working conditions. In October, a federal jury ordered Tesla to pay $137 million to a black employee who accused the automaker of ignoring racial abuse. So out of an entire portrait, there's a short, small paragraph about some more controversial critique of Elon Musk. This way of presenting him frames the way that we understand his journey as an entrepreneur, which frames the way that we understand his decision and our judgment of him. Again, everything in the article is factually correct, but it's a form of rhetoric from which we need to lift the veil in order to understand some things more than others. In that portrait, everything is individualistic, everything is personal, and everything is a challenge that Elon Musk overcame. They are not developing a lot the fact that the wealth of his family helped him tremendously when he was growing up, and then when he decided to move to Canada, and then to start his first company. Coming from a wealthy family allowed him to do that, and his family gave him a lot of money to start his first company. That's also factually correct. It doesn't diminish necessarily the accomplishment. And again, the fact that we don't say that he was a man and white in apartheid South Africa is something very notable in describing someone who grew up at that time. We don't really look at that, and therefore it puts in the background the politics of that. So you see that lifting the veil of rhetorics also means that you connect with other ways of seeing the trajectory of someone who achieved a lot. Multiple framing, there are other points of view. Maybe they could have interviewed other people that he pushed aside in his trajectory, but also the politics that is behind it. And just to show you a contrasting figure in the same magazine, there was several portraits of Oprah, and I'll show you how they described Oprah already in the late 80s. For more than a decade, she has dominated the afternoon airwaves with her syndicated talk show. She is among the nation's most admired and influential people. When Winfrey discovered the novel, they're talking about a book that she turned into a movie. When she discovered the novel upon its publication in 1987, she was moved as a reader, as an African American, as a woman who suffered the death of the child she gave birth to when she was 14. Winfrey in the movie is barely recognizable, not because she uses putty and prosthesis, but because she has deglamorized herself. She has also given birth to herself as a force in Hollywood that needs a more mature future and in an America that needs to remember its past. Again, nothing is factually incorrect in that description, but here you see that the gender and the race of Oprah Winfrey comes back and back in the description. So it puts in our mind very much that she is a Black African American and that she is a woman. All these parts are in the portrait. And what's interesting is that the fact that you are an African American woman in the US is objectively important for your trajectory, but so is being a white man in apartheid South Africa, and yet it's absent. You could say that it's because it's the late 80s, but a later portrait in 2004 in the same magazine of Oprah says, by the time Oprah Winfrey became the first Black woman to make it onto the Forbes billionaire list in 2003, she was already the most successful talk show host in the TV history and a producer, media mogul, actor, author, philanthropist, unparalleled clout. Again, it's factually correct that she's the first, how do they phrase it? She's the first Black woman to make it to the lists. But here again, it comes first into the description, and the rhetoric tells us a lot about things that are not discussed from a political point of view and from a multiple framing point of view. You could do exactly the same thing with someone like Janice Bryant Oroyd, who's an extremely successful entrepreneur. She founded an employment agency, and she, just like Oprah Winfrey, is always described as a Black woman. Again, factually correct and necessary in the description, but I'm contrasting it with the fact that it would be factually correct and important to say it about Elon Musk in the portrait of 2001 in the same magazine, and it's not made. There was the same in the obituary that was made for John H. Johnson, who was an African American billionaire and is described as such, and therefore framing with rhetoric a bit of our ability to think about these things. So you see, rhetoric, the veil of rhetoric, politics, and multiple framing are interplaying constantly, And in that case, it allows us to see more into these portraits than what is just factually presented to us.